Welcome to the Futurum Tech Podcast and Webcast. Now, audio and video for everyone out there. I'm your host today, Daniel Newman, a principal analyst at Futurum Research, joined by my partner this week, Shelly Kramer. Shelly, how you doing? Welcome to the show. First time in a while we've been on together.
First time in a while, yeah.
So it's always fun to get us both on the show at the same time. The beauty has been somehow, despite the fact that we aren't traveling, and you traveled a lot and I traveled even more, I'm somehow working more hours. And I think you found the same thing too. It hasn't necessarily relieved us in any way of the amount of work. It just allows us to sort of be closer to the work all the time.
All the time. I thought that as I was turning off my computer at 9:45 last night. So yes, all work all the time.
Yeah, at least it wasn't one of those edits I send you at like 9, being like, can you deeply edit and read this for me so I can have this published in the next 10 minutes?
Right.
I'm famous for it. So every once in a while when you read my stuff, if it sounds really good, you might want to check out Shelly Kramer stuff, because a lot of times she is adding a little bit of spice, a little paprika to that chili, as I like to say. But no, we have an interesting show here on the Futurum Tech Podcast today. Excited to talk about what we would say pandemic marketing. I wanted to call it post-pandemic marketing, but I think I was being a little optimistic when I titled it. So we're just going to say pandemic marketing and really talking about exploring the marketing shifts in tech and what tech is going to have to do kind of like now. Well, not kind of, like actually like now and in the near future, as this state of new normal, which I have very wavering opinions on that term, but as new normal emerges, as companies start to try to bring events back, as demand needs to be created, as a lot of our social habits need to be deeply looked at, and of course our digital transformations need to be further explored and investigated. But really interesting topic, Shelly, something that's on our mind a lot, and it's something we do a lot with for our customers. But things are not the same. Things are not the same no matter how much we want them to be.
And I'm not sure they're going to be, really, ever again. Or at least for a while. And I tend to lead with optimism, but I think that for me, what's exciting about this, and I feel like I, want to look out for stones saying this is an exciting time, but, we're immersed in the digital transformation space, and we've been immersed in that for a decade, before we were calling it digital transformation, right? So what we're basically seeing now is 2 years worth of digital transformation happening in the space of a couple of months. And we're going to have to keep seeing that continue forward. So for me, and I assume for you as well, it's exciting to see companies who are maybe some of, laggards, or who really weren't all in, how we can use technology to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish, whether it's shifting to remote work or something else. I mean, to me, that's exciting. Don't you think?
Well, I'll give you the two sides of it. I mean, first of all, a quick chronology. This pandemic has sort of created this this shift in work that took place in a couple of phases. The first phase was, oh, wow, we may not be able to travel for a little bit. Let's have our event on Zoom. Because essentially right up to about Mobile World Congress, late February, it was sort of a question mark of just whether would events get canceled. Right. This is when most of the pandemic was going on. It was in China, and in fact, it wasn't even yet quite called a pandemic in the beginning. Right. It was in that phase where it might be, but we certainly saw the writing on the wall. And then there was like a couple things got canceled, and then a lot of companies are like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to cancel our event, but we're just going to throw it up on Zoom or WebEx or right. Teams or on 24. And so everyone basically just took their physical format events and threw them online. And they're just like, we're going to do exactly what we plan to do live, and we'll do it online. And for a few weeks, that concept was okay. But boy, after maybe 3 or 4, I remember I did 3 or 4 of these events in like a 2-week period, and it was awful, Shelly. It was really terrible. It's too long. There's none of the value. Like I said, events, the thing about events that everybody loves is everything that happens in between the sessions. That's not to say your keynotes and panels aren't important. It's just to say that it's those conversations in the halls as you're walking from one end of the event to the other. It's the coffees in the morning with people you've worked with for years. It's the dinner and wine with prospects. That's the stuff that really people go to events and love. It's the bands that get brought in, the high-end bands that people don't get to see. They get up close and personal. So that kind of stuff. all gone, but all the meat and the content was still being thrown at a voracious pace, and it was really, really horrible after a couple of weeks. And then the next phase is really kind of where we're at now, and it slowly emerged. But then it was when the companies basically said, we're gonna cancel. We're not just canceling the physical event, we're gonna cancel the digital event, because we had entered a phase that was completely overwhelming. It overwhelmed our system, it overwhelmed our government, it overwhelmed our businesses. People weren't ready. And then when people realized it had landed here on our shores in the US, and there was a trajectory that was not fully understood, and it's been changing, and it's continued to change this trajectory. It was, we heard everything from millions of potential fatalities to a number now that's still way too high, but companies weren't going to risk it. So events got canceled. Digital events weren't timely. It was off color for companies to be talking about their products, marketing, and to be touting their wares at their events. So everything got crushed. And now we're sort of hitting this, what I would say is it's not post-pandemic, but it's mid-pandemic. I don't know if we're at the 9th hole, the 13th hole, or the 2nd hole, but we're starting to get more clarity, Shelly, as to like where we're going to be, that we're not traveling soon. There's not going to be live events probably anytime in 2020. And we're going to likely, or even early 2021, like, I don't know if there'll be a CES next year. Something would have to change really quickly for there to be a CES next year. We could be probably into the later half of 2021 before we start to see a more regular event schedule, which, by the way, companies were super dependent on events. So now all the companies, and many of them are working with us, Shelly, are coming to companies like us, the analysts, the influencers, the media, the technology bloggers, journalists, and saying, help us. We need help, because we use events. Events is our launch pad. Events is our lead gen. Events is where we meet our customers. We don't have them anymore. So I realize I'm a little long-winded here, but I think that's an important chronology to note, because here we are. Companies are like, okay, we can start talking about our stuff again. Still sensitive, still need to be a little bit cautious. Can't be too gratuitous in our promotion, but we also can't stop working forever. What do they do? What do you think?
Well, I think that a couple of things. First of all, big tech has been the clear winner as it relates to all things related to the pandemic, okay? Because a lot of big tech has become essential services. Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, Apple, Facebook, even, and these companies also have the benefit of, a lot of cash in the bank. And so some of these companies are not operating from a place of hurt. But when we look at, we've seen all of these same companies that I just named have to cancel events. And then we look at another tier of companies, some equally big companies, some not quite so big. And I think that what we have is we have a lot of budget that's been set aside for events. Not that companies haven't lost money on canceled events and everything else, but I think that what we're seeing is that brands are looking at, how do we take what we've budgeted for these in-person events, and how do we try to create, we can't replicate events necessarily, but how do we create some experiences that are real? And to your point, Daniel, like, create in some ways those things that happen in the hall, and allow that interaction to happen. And I think that there are brands that are doing a good job, and there are some brands who are not doing a great job. And I'll give you an example. I sit through a lot of webinars and events these days, just kind of watching what people do. And I sat through a webinar that a major brand did earlier this week. And I had to slap myself 7 times to stay awake. And, a webinar, PowerPoint presentation, the presenters were not very good. What I was seeing on the screen was, like company branding on one side and then a PowerPoint on the other side. And I'm sitting in front of a gigantic monitor, and yet I can hardly see what's on the PowerPoint presentation. And I'm thinking, this is not going to work. From a marketing standpoint, this is not going to work. And so I think that what really needs to happen is, I think that brands need to pivot quickly. Some of them we're seeing do that. Some of them maybe not quite so much. But I think, to your point about thinking about, this isn't about marketing what it is we sell. It's about understanding what challenges our customers and our prospects are dealing with right now, what those struggles are, and how we bring solutions to the table that help them, and to be able to present that in a way, and maybe it's not a boring webinar. And we already know it can't be an in-person event, but this is where, you can do things. We've done a ton of this, podcast interviews, video interviews. We've talked with our clients about doing some roundtable discussions that are video roundtable discussions. I was talking with a client earlier this week and putting together a potential media event that involved, we've all done sort of media events with brands before, but this concept that I pitched to them just kind of involved inviting members of the media to do a WebEx or a Zoom meeting or something like that, and sending them, a bottle of wine or a bottle of whiskey, or finding out what their, alcohol preference, if any, is, and having some dinner delivered, and having it be, instead of a pitch and a brand presentation, just having it be a conversation where you're sitting around asking questions. They can ask questions. The brand reps can answer, and influencers could be involved. And, the brand was really, really interested in that kind of thing. And the difference there is that adds a personal element to what is a PR or a marketing event. And I think that's what people, all of us who are working from home right now, I don't want to be marketed to with some slick ad. I want a personal connection with you or with whoever it is that I'm thinking about working with. And I think that'll go a long way.
Yeah, and I think in tech specifically, because that's where we spend a lot of our time, pretty much all of it now, the marketing mix has changed a lot. And I think what's happening is companies are really doing this little self-inflection point, and they're trying to decide how to get back on track. But I think there's a lot of don't know, and old habits dying hard going on. I think we're still seeing a lot of companies that want to do an event 2-3 days of online. We're seeing.
I can't do that.
I won't. I won't.
Well, no, I can't. But the part of it is, when you get me to get on a plane, to come to your event, to participate in your event, to do interviews, to cover your event as an analyst, you've got me, for 2 days of breakfasts and dinner and meetings and everything else. But I can't do that in a virtual setting.
Yeah. And so and you're absolutely right. And I could barely do it in a live setting. I'm the worst. My attention is terrible at times. More one-on-one, more direct interaction with the executives, always really important. I love a good keynote, but rarely are they good. So sometimes those are really hard to get. And then when you take away that element of, basically when you add the element of distance, meaning the distance of online, Zoom is not the same as online, same as in person. It is not.
Right.
It is good. Being face-to-face is good, but there's a difference. It goes back to why we've gone to concerts for years when you can listen to Spotify. There's something about being there that we can't necessarily replace. But having said that, we have to for now. We have to replace it for now. And so the mix for tech, especially big tech, a lot of the B2B side of tech, there is a big cry for validation that's going to need to come in the form of a softer skill set in marketing. I had a conversation the other day with a tech company that we're implementing we're doing these fireside chats for their partner community. And as an analyst and author, I'm being involved. I'm talking with one of the executives, and we said, let's get a little more raw. Let's be a little bit more vulnerable. And I know this sounds cheesy coming from a guy. I said, but coming from anybody. But the point was, I said, put me in front of the room. Don't stage it too much.
Right.
1 or 2 opening questions. I said, let the group ask questions. Let me answer them honestly. Let me tell them all the uncertainties and uncomfortable things that maybe we don't want to talk about right now, that we don't know if things that have worked in the past will ever work again. We don't know if the tactics, whether they be in marketing or in product launches. I mean, product launches right now are an absolute disaster because you can only launch on a stream so many times before people are going to want a new way. We can't touch anything. We can't feel anything. I mean, these are very tactical experiences, in the sense of you get a new phone, a new device. I went to Samsung's launch of their new flip and foldable devices. You can't touch the things. You don't get that experience. And then
Right.
the company wants to sell them for thousands of dollars. Apple right now, hitting some harder times. People aren't going to have the same disposable economic situations. What's going to be marketing creativity for a company like Apple that's lived for the launch for the longest time? Sure, you can stream Tim Cook up in front of the room holding up a device, but it's not the same. You can't line up outside an Apple store. We're going to line up 6 feet apart. You're going to tent. You're going to camp. You're going to need a acreage of camping grounds to keep people's tents far enough apart. You can't
Not going to happen.
Organic buzz that you were able to build in the past, but you're going to still need to build momentum. People want billions of dollars of these devices sold. And if you're in more of a B2B tech, data center tech, chip tech, you're even less interesting to the general public. So you're going to need more specialization, more people that can really understand, decipher, get content in front in multiple tiers, whether that's to tier one media, whether that's opinion pieces, whether that's, like you said, podcasts and webcasts. But what I would say as a whole is you need a very complete marketing mix. You need third-party validation more than ever before. You need to think about strategies with things like webinars. Yes, they generate leads, but how do you put content around that mix that's more interesting? Because we'll do webinars, we do them all the time. We do white papers all the time. And we understand that's a key mix for a B2B tech company trying to drive very specific demand. But things like this conversation that hopefully you're watching live right now, but maybe you're listening to it, that are much more engaging, much more open, much more of a discussion, a little bit like watching a talk show, CNBC, or watching, CNN or Fox or whatever your thing is, something that interests you. And that's what the problem is otherwise it's just slides and words. And we're getting so much of that now.
Well, and I think that brands have been really lazy for a really long time, completely pre-pandemic, in terms of their messaging, whether it's email messaging, whether it's just so self-centric, so we're amazing. And I think that now is not the time for that kind of messaging. You spoke about content, your content strategy has never been more important than it is right now. And content has always been king. More so now, but creating content, understanding that different people have different preferences. And one of the reasons that we migrated to doing these shows in video form also is that we've had a podcast for years, but we know that not everybody listens to podcasts, and some people like video, and some people like to just be able to feast their eyes on the Daniel Newman in the flesh. And so I think that understanding that and being able to do things quick little bites, quick little sound bites of things that are relevant, that aren't, we're here for you and we're all in this together messaging. I think, people are already sick of that. But some things people might not be thinking about that I was spending some time looking at in advance of this show is, digital advertising works. And in some instances, it's actually gotten cheaper. Cost per impression on Facebook ads has dropped substantially and their traffic has surged. Okay. So you may be saying, as a B2B technology brand, Facebook, but you know what? That's where people are. People are hanging out on Facebook. People are hanging out on LinkedIn, exploring what you and your team are doing on LinkedIn. And, I have seen over the course of the past year, LinkedIn, I've always been a big LinkedIn user. I know you have been too. But, LinkedIn has really gotten on people's radar screens, and LinkedIn has really gotten on brands' radar screens. I shared with our team yesterday, our team of analysts, in a conversation that I was having a meeting with a major technology brand yesterday. And we were talking about in advance of an event that I'm helping them with. And they were talking about the fact that they're watching impressions and engagement on Twitter and the benefit that they're getting from that decrease. And they're really seeing an upswing in what's happening for them on LinkedIn. So brands are making that shift. Sometimes you have to put digital ad dollars there, but also smart media partnerships. I think that's really important. You talked about this earlier in your conversation, media partnerships, relationships with, and, in the most unbiased way possible, relationships with analysts, relationships with influencers, and knowing, that what an analyst or an influencer brings to your campaigns, your initiatives, is that, we have our own opinions. We're not going to say something that the brand wants us to say just because the brand's paying us. That's not how we built our reputations. It's not how we built our credibility. We bring our audiences to the table when it comes to conversations that we have with brands. We expand reach. And I think that what brands are finding right now, and not only from a marketing standpoint, but from a sales standpoint, for those of us who've been playing is the wrong word, but who've understood the value of social channels for a long time, we've built really deep, really strong, really valuable networks. And a lot of people haven't done that. A lot of salespeople haven't done that. A lot of people have eschewed the use of any kind of social channels. And now they're playing a game of catch up. So I think, you made the point earlier that brands need to really rethink what they're doing in social, what they're doing in content. I would add to it advertising as well. And lastly, I think that we cannot ever forget how important email is. And there's a whole lot of people out there who don't like email that I've thought in more than one instance. And I can't tell you how many clients I encounter when I ask, what does your email list look like? How are you connecting with your customers on a regular basis? How are you using email as part of your demand gen, as part of just staying connected to current customers? And clients sometimes look at me with glassy eyes. And so I think that kind of all of those things are a really important part of the equation for marketing and for tech marketing moving forward.
Yeah, I think you bring up a number of great points. I like the idea of considering what social channels are working. I mean, this isn't even really a pandemic playbook or marketing at all.
Right.
Just like using data and analytics. We decided very early on with our family of companies, and a lot of people might know us for Futurum Research, but we have Broad Suite Media Group, which is a media arm that has millions of contacts of decision makers in business. We have an agency in V3B that we own that provides back office type operations for social, for digital, for content. And we did those things very intentionally. And while Futurum is that front facing analyst, research, influence brand, we realized that having data driven convertible type of outcomes that we could actually speak to in our proposals, in our customer discussions, were going to matter. And this was years ago when we started this, that we realized that it can't just be about impressions.
Right.
Every phase of social and digital, there's been a gamification aspect.
Right.
Whether that was early on, remember Twitter, you do follow first, and people would build huge followings because it was all follow back. And you'd see people, 300,000 followers, they must be influential.
Right.
Are they? And then you saw, you see tagging strategies on LinkedIn and on Facebook and even on Twitter where people tag 10, 12, and as many as they can. And of course, there's always people. So the metrics, the reach, it looks good. And then of course, there's cheap redirecting traffic on the web. You can buy traffic. So I always say to customers, and we have a really good reach organically. I've always enjoyed having the benefit of a number of tier 1 outlets, being able to write on Forbes or Market Watch, and that stuff's good and that's helpful and it's measurable and the traffic is legitimate. But I've always told customers, especially in tech marketing, it should be in most cases conversion focused. Right. Whether that's if you're a consumer type tech, that might be conversion where the customer clicks and buys something. In big tech, which is where a lot of our resources go, that's probably a lead in the funnel. Right. And I've always said, if you're just using third-party validation and hoping for success, you could spend a lot of money because working with analysts is not inexpensive. White paper, appearances, webcasts, expensive. We love this business, by the way. But the point of it is that if you can say we put X customers, X prospects in funnel through that webcast, through that paper, through that research, through that event, that's really what the playbook, the strategy of the marketer needs to be right now is how do we determine ROI? Don't tell me you can't measure ROI in digital marketing. And if you meet someone, if you're a marketer in a tech company and you talk to an analyst firm, an influencer, a blogger, and they want to sell you impressions,
Right.
Run. Just hang up and run.
But you know what? To be perfectly fair, Daniel, I have conversations with brands on a daily basis who are asking that same question. Now what kind of impressions can we expect? And so sometimes that level of knowledge, even on the brand side, the marketing team side, the social team side, is still very tied up in some things that are easy to gamify, easy to buy, and that don't really have great value. And we always try, when we're doing something, when we're producing, maybe we're partnering with a brand to do a podcast or a webcast like this on a particular topic, and it might be tied to a topic on which we or they have developed a piece of research or a white paper or something like that. So, including a call to action that, here you can slide over here and grab this white paper, and collecting that lead and putting it in the funnel. That needs to be a really significant part of what your efforts are. And I think we miss that a lot when people get tied up in, as you say, impressions.
Yeah, well, it's a marketing mix, Shelly. It's a marketing mix that needs to incorporate a lot of different aspects. And I think that's what we think a lot about. And that's what I hope those leading product management, marketing, business units that are sort of exploring the landscape of events and third-party validation. And I want to share a little bit about what we're doing with everybody out there, because this is something we thought a lot about. When this first happened, we've pivoted and we've tried to be the, both you and I, Shelly, have talked, written, and done a lot of our own work on digital transformation, trying to be the agile company that we propose everyone else to be. So whether that was becoming agile, we did a podcast blitz straight away. That started off to be a podcast blitz event focused for all the events that were being canceled. And it became a pandemic focused podcast blitz where we helped companies crystallized messaging and got executives to join us to talk about how companies were responding to this COVID-19 crisis. And that was a tremendous experience. It was, for us as an analyst firm, we got to learn a lot about what companies were doing, which came out in the work, but also came out in the things we were able to publish, the writing, the social. And then the next phase was, our media experience lends well to us doing a bigger, broader events than just podcasts. So of course we're continuing to do podcasts. Feels like a ton
every day.
I feel like I'm podcasting every day right now. Yeah. But we're launching a big idea summit at Futurum that will start this summer and go into the fall. A lot of you know that I do a podcast series with Patrick Moorhead at More Insights called the 6-5. We're going to do a big event that's going to feature the analysts of More, as well as our whole team, Shelly and I's team here at Futurum. And we'll probably have 40 or 50 big tech vendors involved in this event. And it's a thought leadership event. But we were very careful to think about this event and the opportunities for that media mix. And that's kind of why that marketing mix that we talked about. It's important that there's a promotional aspect. There's a thought leadership aspect. There's a chance for executives to be featured. There's a demand generation aspect. There is a bolt-on marketing deliverables, whether that's additional lead gen, whether that's additional podcasts that all of our participating companies are going to have a chance. And yeah, I know, I realize I might be sounding like I'm selling a little bit now, but the thing is what we were doing was we were really thinking of, what do businesses need? Businesses that need to pivot. And so every one of our events, it's not just about, hey, let's jump on the web and do a webcast, do a video, do a podcast. Let's think about an integrated marketing strategy that we can take our tech know-how, our market influence, our research and analysis, and let's couple it up with companies' needs to put their thought leaders forward, their voices forward, and the narratives, and show tech leadership in a digitally transformed way. And so, no, digital events aren't new. We think what we're going to do is going to be a little newer, a little cooler, a little hipper, and a little more measurable for most companies that get involved than in the past. But I think, Shelly, that it's really important right now that companies are cautious, companies are careful. But my last word, and I'll give you one of your own, is if you are fortunate enough, and many of our tech customers are, to not be in a really bad economic state due to what's going on, and trust me, we empathize. We're a small company. We've been very carefully monitoring our business. This affects everybody, and everyone's dealing with this situation. But if you're fortunate enough to have business, and a lot of tech companies, just based on the earnings this week, are in pretty good shape, don't let yourself become paralyzed by what's going on. Don't, because there will be a backside of this, whether that's 3 months now, 6 months, 12 months, there will be an end. And as time goes on, the sensitivity to this particular outbreak will diminish. We've seen it in history, whether it's been 9/11, whether it's been the credit crisis, whether it's this pandemic, people will get back to a more normal, and what will interest them in hearing about will be more normal. And I can't tell you a few of the big companies that have cut off efforts, have frozen up. And this isn't just short term. This is because there's a pipeline, doing events, doing podcasts, doing white papers, doing research, if you stop today, it means you're going to have nothing in July or August or September. So if you are fortunate enough to be in the financial situation to keep marketing, don't stop marketing. Be more sensitive. Try to be more on tone to what's going on in the world, but don't stop, because the riskiest thing a business can do is stand still.
Well, and I think that the important thing is that, this is not marketing advice. This is, advice from tech analysts. You can't sit still, and I think that, the point you made at the beginning of this was that, that the key to success, and you said this when you were talking about how we put together a strategy for our forward movement as we, began to navigate through this pandemic. And the key thing there is so easy. What do our customers need right now, and how can we help them? That's it.
Yeah, that
really is that simple.
That was nicely said. It was so good. I didn't realize you were done talking. But no, I think that's a great question, Shelly. And it's a great way to end the show is, what do customers need? Being more sensitive. We'll go ahead and, we'll share some resources in the show notes of this show, because we've written about this. You've written about this. I wrote a Forbes article that was exactly about this topic. There's a lot of advice out there. Most of it stinks. Ours is good. So listen to ours. No, I'm just kidding. But there is a lot of advice out there. Do think carefully whom you're listening to. We hope it's to us. Thank you so much for tuning into the Futurum Tech Podcast and Futurum Tech TV today. Hopefully you're watching us, but if you're not watching, hopefully you're listening, or hopefully you're consuming it in the way that makes you happy. And that's our goal, is to try to make this available to you in as many formats as possible. But for this particular episode, Shelly and I have to say goodbye, but we hope you found it valuable. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you again very soon. But for now, we're out of here. Bye.